I built that rocking chair by hand the summer before my grandson was born. Took me 11 weekends. Maple wood, hand sanded, with a carved grove of pine trees along the backrest, something I'd been sketching in my notebook for years, saving for the right moment. I finished it 3 days before Claire's due date, wrapped it in a moving blanket, and loaded it into the back of my truck with the kind of careful pride that only a grandfather could understand. Me name is Raymond Kowalski. I spent 31 years as a pipe welder in western Pennsylvania, raised my son Derek on a mechanic's schedule and a teacher's budget after his mother passed from a stroke when he was 14. We didn't have much, but we had each other and a small house on Birchwood Lane that I'd paid off by 52. When Derek brought Claire home for the first time, she was polished in a way I hadn't seen up close before, pressed linen, a leather bag that probably cost more than my monthly utility bills, and a handshake that felt like a performance. She worked in financial consulting. Her family owned property in 3 states. She'd grown up attending private school in Connecticut and seemed to treat the distance between her childhood and mine as a kind of character flaw on my part. I gave her the benefit of the doubt. That's what you do for your son. Derek had met her at a conference in Pittsburgh. He was working in project management by then, doing well for himself. I was proud. He'd worked hard and earned everything he had. But I noticed, gradually, the way Claire's presence reshaped him. The restaurants changed. The vocabulary shifted. The visits home became shorter and further apart. I told myself it was just the adjustment of a new relationship. I kept telling myself that for 2 years. They got married in a vineyard in upstate New York. I wore my good sport coat, navy blue, the one I'd bought for Derek's college graduation. Claire's mother made a comment about the seating arrangement that I didn't quite catch, but I saw the look that passed between her and Claire's aunt. I filed it away and smiled through the reception. When they announced the pregnancy, I wept. Actual tears. Standing alone in my kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug of decaf. A grandchild. Something I'd quietly given up on as the years stretched out between visits. I drove 4 hours to be there. The hospital waiting room smelled like industrial cleaner and burnt coffee. I sat in a blue plastic chair for 6 hours with a paper bag of sandwiches I'd made that morning, listening to the muffled sounds beyond the swinging doors. Derek texted twice, still in labor. Then almost there, Dad. I watched a family across the room celebrate, passing a newborn around like a small miracle. I thought, soon that'll be us. Derek appeared in the doorway around 7 in the evening. He looked exhausted and lit up at the same time, the way new fathers do when the world reshapes itself around a single moment. He waved me over, but Claire's mother was already in the room, and Claire's sister, and a cousin I'd met once at the wedding. I walked in carrying the blanket I'd brought, soft green, is the color of new leaves, and the small stuffed bear I'd picked up at the gift shop downstairs because I'd wanted something for the baby to hold right now. Not later. Claire was sitting up in the hospital bed, the baby in her arms. Small, red-faced, impossibly new. My grandson. I took 1 step forward. Claire looked up, and her expression shifted just slightly, just enough into something that wasn't welcome. She didn't say anything at first. She looked at Derek. A long, quiet look that carried a conversation inside it. Derek's face changed too. He stepped slightly to the side, positioning himself between me and the bed in a way I don't think he even realized he was doing. Claire's mother moved to stand closer to the bed. I stopped walking. Rye. Derek's voice was low. Maybe give us a few minutes. I looked at my son. He didn't meet my eyes. Claire said it quietly. The kind of quiet that's designed to be overheard without being accused of being said aloud. He doesn't need to hold him today. I don't know if she meant me not to hear it. I don't know if it matters. I set the stuffed bear on the windowsill. I placed the folded blanket on the chair near the door. I looked at my grandson, 8 pounds, 4 ounces. according to the whiteboard on the wall. Born at 6:52 p.m., and I memorized his face from where I stood. Then I nodded, said congratulations, and walked out. I sat in my truck in the hospital parking garage for 20 minutes before I could drive. Not crying, I was past that, somehow just sitting very still with my hands on the wheel, watching the fluorescent lights flicker above the concrete pillars. I drove home, all 4 hours. Stopped once for gas outside Uniontown. Got back to Birchwood Lane at midnight. Carried the rocking chair back into the garage and covered it with a tarp. Derek called 3 days later. We talked around what had happened the way you talk around a hole in the floor, acknowledging it only by careful navigation. He said Claire was tired, that the birth had been stressful, that things would settle down. I said I understood. I almost did. Over the following months, the visits became more structured. Claire's structure. There were approved dates, limited hours. Subjects I could sense were off limits without being told explicitly. I met my grandson, they named him Oliver, at their house in Shadyside, in Claire's living room, with Claire present. While she watched me with the specific attention of someone monitoring a situation rather than sharing a moment, I held Oliver twice in his first year, both times with Claire standing close enough that I could smell her perfume. I never said anything to Derek. What would I have said? That I could feel the boundary, that I understood. With the wordless certainty of a man who has been quietly managed before. That I was being kept at a measured distance. He was caught in the middle of something he didn't have the tools to name. And I loved him too much to force the naming, so I learned to be content with less blank. Birthday cards. A check at Christmas. A photo. Derek texted me every few weeks. Oliver in the backyard. Oliver at a soccer game. Oliver missing a front tooth and grinning like the world was still simple. I kept those photos. Everyone. Printed them at the pharmacy and put them in a frame on the mantel. Life on Birchwood Lane continued without dramatic incident. I retired from welding at 64. He started doing handyman work for neighbors. Something to do. Something useful. Rebuilt a back porch on Sycamore Street. Replaced a deck on the far side of the hill for a retired schoolteacher named Marguerite, who paid me in casseroles and conversation, which was an arrangement I found more than satisfying. I started woodworking again in earnest. The rocking chair under the tarp wasn't the last thing I made. I built a bookcase, then a blanket chest, then a set of kitchen shelves for Marguerite. I got good at it the way you get good at something when you have time and patience and nothing to prove to anyone. I joined a Thursday morning breakfast group at the diner on Franklin Avenue, 5 or 6 men, all retired, all carrying some version of the same quiet that accumulates when the loud years are over. We talked about sports and local politics and the difficulty of dealing with adult children who thought they knew better. Nobody was dramatic about it. It was just the texture of the life we were living. I learned to be okay. I want to be clear about that, because it matters for what comes next. I was not sitting in misery on Birchwood Lane waiting for the universe to deliver justice. I had built something real inside my own life. Small. Yes. Ordinary. Certainly. But mine. Oliver turned 3. Then 4. The structured visits became less frequent. 1 year there was no Christmas. I sent a card and a check, and received a brief thank you text from Derek 2 weeks later. When Oliver was 5, Derek called to tell me he and Claire were separating. He said it matter-of-factly, the way people announce things they've been rehearsing. I asked if he was okay. He said he was getting there. I didn't ask about Claire. The divorce took 14 months. I know because Derek called me once a month through the whole thing, sometimes crying, sometimes steady, always a little lost. I listened. I drove up to Shadyside twice, once for dinner, once just to sit in his apartment and watch a football game and not talk. That's what fathers do when they know that presence matters more than advice. When the divorce finalized, Custody was split. Oliver would spend alternating weeks with each parent. Derek would have every other weekend plus Wednesdays. Standard arrangement. For the first time in 5 years. Derek asked if Oliver could visit me alone. I said yes before he finished the sentence. Oliver was 7, the first time he came to Birchwood Lane by himself, well, with Derek driving him, but without Claire. He stood in my doorway in a green raincoat and Spider-Man sneakers, holding a plastic dinosaur in each hand. Looking at my house with the serious evaluation of a child taking careful inventory of a new world. Is that a real fireplace, he asked. It is, I said. Does it make fire? When I light it. He thought about this. Okay, he said, and walked in like he owned the place. Which, in some important sense, I hadn't expected to feel so quickly. He did. We spent that first weekend doing almost nothing by objective measure. I showed him the garage workshop. He named every tool. I let him touch this one's for cutting. This one's for smashing. His taxonomy was creative, if imprecise. We ate grilled cheese and tomato soup at the kitchen table. We watched half an old Western before he fell asleep against my shoulder on the couch. I carried him to the spare bedroom, the one I'd put a new quilt on. A blue and yellow patchwork one I'd found at an estate sale. Thinking it might suit a boy, and I stood in the doorway for a long moment just watching him breathe. 9 years of distance, compressed into one ordinary weekend. I understood something that night about patience that I hadn't been able to name before. It isn't the absence of feeling. It's the refusal to let feeling become bitterness. I had missed so much of Oliver's early life, and I was going to miss none of what remained. The Tuesday morning, Claire knocked on my door. It was raining. Not hard, the light. Persistent kind of rain that makes everything smell like wet concrete in coming autumn. I was in the kitchen, coffee on, listening to the radio, when I heard a car in the driveway. I looked out the window. Her car, a newer model than I remembered. Silver was parked behind my truck. She sat behind the wheel for a long moment before she got out. She was dressed more carefully than I would have expected for a rainy Tuesday. Her hair was pulled back. She walked to the door without an umbrella and stood on my porch with rain on her shoulders. And she knocked 3 times. I opened the door. She looked at me for a moment without speaking. Up close, I could see she was tired in a way that makeup doesn't fully cover. Raymond, she said. Claire, can I come in? I stepped back and let her through. She sat at my kitchen table, and I poured 2 cups of coffee without asking, because it seemed like the kind of moment that required something to do with your hands. She wrapped both palms around the mug like she was cold. Derek told me Oliver loves coming here. She said. He does. I said, and I love having him. Silence. She looked at the framed photos on the wall Oliver at various ages. Some of them pictures I'd taken myself this past year. Some of them, the pharmacy prints from the early years. He talks about you, she said. All the time now. Grandpa Ray this. Grandpa Ray that. He wants to learn woodworking. I know. We've started. She nodded slowly. There was something working behind her eyes that I recognized as the labor of saying a hard thing. I was wrong, she said. About you. About what I thought you were. I didn't say anything. I thought. She stopped. Tried again. My father was not a good man. Raymond. And you reminded me of him in ways that I now understand were not real. You were wearing a face that wasn't yours. I put it on you, and I kept it there. I looked at my coffee cup. What happened at the hospital? She said. Was wrong. I've known that for a long time. I didn't know how to say it. Outside. The rain tapped against the kitchen window. The radio had gone to a weather report. I reached over and turned it off. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness, she said. I know I don't have the right to ask that. I'm here because Oliver asked me why I never took him to your house when he was little. and I didn't have an answer that wasn't the truth. And I am tired of living inside a lie that hurts my son. I looked at her then. Really looked at her. She was not the polished woman from the vineyard, or the careful monitor in the shady-side living room. She was a woman sitting across from the man she had wronged, in a house she had kept her child from, trying to be honest in a way that clearly cost her something. I heard what you said at the hospital. I told her. I never forgot it. She closed her eyes briefly. I know. I didn't fight back. I said, not because I wasn't hurt. I was. But because I decided that the only thing I could control was who I was going to be while I waited. She opened her eyes. They were bright. I'm not looking for an apology. I said, what I want is for Oliver to know his grandfather. That's already happening. Whatever brought you to my door this morning, whether it's guilt or growth or some combination of both, I'm glad you came. And I meant what I said. I'm not interested in war. I never was. She exhaled. A long, slow breath that seemed to carry something out of her. We sat in the kitchen for another hour. She told me about the divorce, about co-parenting, to about a therapy process. She'd started the previous winter that had brought her to several hard reckonings about her own childhood and the patterns she'd inherited. I listened without interrupting. I told her a few things about the past 9 years, the woodworking, the Thursday breakfasts, Marguerite's casseroles, the way Oliver had walked into my house like he owned it. She laughed once, a real laugh, short and surprised, at the Spider-Man sneakers. When she stood to go, she paused in the doorway. He's going to ask if he can spend a long weekend here, she said, over his fall break. Tell him yes. I said. She nodded, put her hand briefly on the doorframe, looked at the hallway, at the framed photos, at the house that had been waiting. You kept pictures of him, she said quietly. Even during everyone, I said. She left without another word. I watched her car back out of the driveway and disappear down the street, rain softening everything behind her. I stood on the porch for a moment longer than necessary, not savoring anything, not replaying the moment with satisfaction, just standing in the ordinary morning, breathing the wet autumn air, aware in a way that felt new and old at the same time that I had done something right by doing almost nothing at all. I went back inside and refilled my coffee. In the garage, under a tarp in the far corner, the rocking chair waited. That afternoon, I pulled the tarp off. The maple wood had held up beautifully. The carved pine trees along the backrest were still crisp, still exactly what I'd intended. I ran my hand along the grain, checking for warping, checking for cracks. There were none. It had been waiting the way things wait when they're built properly, without complaint, without deterioration, with everything intact. I set it in the corner of the spare room, Oliver's room now. Really, though neither of us had said so aloud and stepped back to look at it, it was, I thought, exactly right. Not everything that takes 9 years is wasted time. Sometimes it's just the time it takes for the right moment to arrive at the right door. I made a sandwich, ate it standing at the kitchen counter, and thought about what to teach Oliver next weekend. He'd been asking about dovetail joints, ambitious for his age. But that seemed about right for a kid who walks into a new house and treats it like home before he's been there 5 minutes. I decided we'd start with the basics and see where he wanted to go. That's all any of it is. Really starting with what you have, and seeing where it goes.